Welcome, and thank you for joining us for this EDF Action Climate Talk. I'm Jeremy Pittman, Director of Grassroots Engagement at EDF Action, and I'm thrilled to be joined in conversation today by my colleague Karin Qumby to talk about grassroots organizing and the ongoing campaign to pass critical climate legislation through the US Congress. Before we launch into our conversation, a quick word about EDF Action. EDF Action is the advocacy partner of the Environmental Defense Fund, one of the oldest, largest, and most successful environmental organizations in the United States. You can find out more about EDF Action by visiting our website at edfaction.org, or join us today by texting EDF Action to 52886. Now, building on a long history of success dating back to the 1960s campaign against DDT and other pesticides, EDF and EDF Action have in recent years expanded our efforts to build support for critical climate legislation at the federal level. To talk about that work today, I'm joined by EDF Director of Campaigns, Karin Qumby. Welcome, Karin.
Hi, great to be here with you today, Jeremy.
Thanks. I'd like to start our conversation, Karin, today by asking you to tell us a bit about yourself and how you came to this work.
Well, Jeremy, it's been a long road, as I know it has been for you as well. I was thinking the other day about my first campaign back in the mid-90s when I was helping to pass domestic partner benefits in the LGBTQ movement at the time at a university, and where I didn't know what I had no idea what I was doing, frankly. But, I've been out there with the signs, and then, we needed to convince the president of the university to extend these benefits. And I started to learn about, you got to get influential people to weigh in on this as well with him and so forth. So I really learned kind of, with others on the ground what to do. And from there, I ended up actually teaching for 15 years until I decided, I want to work in politics full time. So I lucked out and got a job with a Congresswoman, Lois Capps, in California. And I worked out of her district office for a number of years as her district representative. I worked on a lot of environmental issues, on and offshore drilling. It was the Bush administration at the time, so we were doing a lot of defensive work like we're doing now, which seems like defense light, frankly, to where we are now with the Trump administration. But after that, thanks to you, I actually got a job at the Human Rights Campaign as a regional field director, and was just so fortunate to work in the LGBTQ movement for a number of years when we started actually winning campaigns. The first campaign being Don't Ask, Don't Tell that I worked on with you, where, I got to go down to Florida and convince Senator Bill Nelson to vote to repeal that law, that policy. So it was a great ride with winning marriage equality finally. And then after those amazing years doing that work, I moved over and I was the national field director at the Moms Clean Air Force, which is an affiliate program at EDF. And then decided to travel around the world for a year and came back. And now I'm in this very wonderful position and back with my wonderful colleagues as the director of campaigns.
So that's amazing. First of all, a tremendous history of activism and action. So thank you. And thanks for bringing us so many of those great successes over the years. Really appreciate that. So director of campaigns, that's your title. What does that mean? What does that mean on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, it seems like a big title, but it's, I'm helping with all of EDF's political affairs department, which is primarily housed or used to be housed in their Washington, D.C. office before we all went home to work. And I help run campaigns for the political affairs department. We were working on our 100% clean campaign that's transitioned now into a Rebuild Better campaign, where we're working to pass federal legislation on climate change and aggressive climate legislation. And we're building the infrastructure and the momentum, working with many, many other organizations, environmental and other organizations around the country to move federal legislation along.
Well, that's no small feat, and we'll talk at length about what that all means in a minute. But how would you characterize the moment we're in? Like, what is this moment? I mean, aside from the global pandemic, what is it about, in our climate change world?
Well, we can't kind of divorce our climate change world from the global pandemic right now. I mean, we're in this very, as everybody has been saying for months and months, an unprecedented moment, not only with COVID, with, the economic crisis that's come from COVID, and then, of course, the murder of George Floyd that has exposed again the vast racial disparities in our country and injustices, as well as has the pandemic itself. On top of that, we know we have an urgent climate crisis, and that if our country and other industrialized countries don't take dramatic action now, that we will suffer the worst effects of climate change, but that we can, if we can take that action now and reduce and eliminate our carbon production to net zero by 2050, that we can avoid the worst effects of climate change. And that's where I see this moment, is that we are undergoing, I think you and I have talked about this, a paradigm shift now in all these areas. And I think that because of as well the youth climate movement that is just generating so much momentum right now, that we can really, really make a difference. And we can actually, I'm feeling hopeful that we can pass some climate legislation in the near future, if not as part of the stimulus packages that we're looking at to recover from our economic crisis.
And there's reason to feel hopeful, right? I mean, it's, of course, the youth climate movement is incredible all around the world and here in the United States, where so many youth are making the urgent calls for climate action and making the connections to their futures and pressing us as older folks to take the actions that are necessary. But it's really, I think, sunk in. I think there's some recent polling that shows that this that people are now more aware of the climate crisis and that they are supportive of federal action on climate change. Is that fair?
Yeah, in fact, EDF did, and it's there on your screen, a poll recently, very recently, that's just been posted, that shows that there's overwhelming bipartisan support to rebuild America's economy with clean energy investment. So that was one of the questions that was asked. And a lot of the action, the federal climate action, needs to be invested in clean energy infrastructure, clean energy, clean transportation, et cetera. And let me just read you these numbers because they're amazing. 80% of Republicans support rebuilding America's economy with clean energy investment. 80% of Republicans, 91% of Democrats, and 83% of independents. I mean, you just don't get numbers like that in our divided country today. And people recognize, I think, that we need to take this action, even if they're on different parts of the political spectrum. I think they've seen through this COVID crisis, when everything shut down and suddenly our air got clear and we could actually see the mountains or see, whatever we couldn't see before because of pollution. We are also recognizing the disparate impacts that communities of color, frontline communities that often live next to power plants in polluted areas of cities, how they're being affected. So, we are at this moment, and this polling shows that in these swing districts, and this poll was generated in swing districts where there's a mix of Republicans and Democrats and independents there, that there's definite public support for taking action now.
So I take great hope from that as well. And some of the folks watching today might not be aware that there's actually been a lot of activity in Congress on climate, just even over the past few months. Could you tell us a bit about that?
There has. In fact, the House of Representatives, the Democratic-led House of Representatives, had been working on a special committee report on the climate crisis for the last 18 months and just released that report at the end of June. This is a 600-page report that has hundreds of policy recommendations for fighting the climate crisis. And if addressed, if all of these policies were implemented in full, we would achieve net zero carbon pollution by 2050. So basically, we have a blueprint now for what we would need to do to achieve that goal. And look, like I said before, and this poll represents, we're already on the way towards that. What we know are that clean energy jobs were growing at 5 times the rate of fossil fuel jobs before this crisis hit us. Clean energy is set to exceed coal as electric generation this year. And before the coronavirus took down the economy, clean energy was growing at 70% faster than the economy as a whole. So we need to, and Congress has actually moved on stimulus spending that will invest in these clean energy industries and jobs. And so the climate crisis report was released in late June. About a week or two later, the House of Representatives voted on a stimulus bill, a $1.5 trillion stimulus bill, the Moving Forward Act, it was called, HR 2, that focused on infrastructure, and on many of the provisions were on green infrastructure, on clean infrastructure. It focused on clean transportation, on natural infrastructure and resiliency, like how can we shore up our communities literally along the coast and in inland rivers and in the West, out here where I am in California in the West with our wildfires. How can we address making our communities safer, as well as replacing another really important provision in that act was replacing lead service lines. Over 4,000 communities in the US still drink water from lead service lines that are poisoning our families, our children. And we have, in that bill, there was money and policies to replace every single one of those lead pipes and provide jobs while we're doing that. So these are two really important actions that Congress has taken in the House, and we need to be supporting that and pushing that.
That's amazing. I really think that most people probably don't know that there's been so much action in the House of Representatives, even across these past few months. So really tremendous to get the word out about that. Of course, as you said, these are actions in the House, the Democratic-controlled House, both the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis Report and the passage of HR 2 that has passed the House but not the Senate yet. And at least with the current makeup of Congress, there's not much hope that we'll get these similar action on the Senate side. So is this useful? Is it useful to have the House taking these actions? Where does it all land?
No, absolutely. Look, what the House has done, both with this report and with their legislation, has given us a vehicle to talk about the issues and to push the issues. So that, one thing I would say to the people listening here and all of our advocates around the country is to look up to see how your member voted on HR 2. Did they vote yes or no? And if they voted yes, give them a call or write them an email and say, thank you for doing that. Thank you for putting the climate crisis first here and taking action on that. If they voted no, you want to know why, and to expose the reasons and perhaps have a productive conversation with your member of Congress around why they didn't vote the way you think they should have. But at the same time, that we know the Senate now needs to take action on an infrastructure bill. You know, the process, if they develop their own similar or different infrastructure bill, the two sides can perhaps conference it, come to some agreement, and then vote to pass it in general. It goes to the president to sign. Now, right, that's probably unlikely at this time. I mean, we're still really focused on relief in our COVID crisis as our cases are surging across the country. The Senate is working on, you know, some legislation that to just address this crisis right now. But this is a multi-year effort, right? We're looking at, we hope not many years from now, maybe even months, depending on what happens in our election in November, that we could have the language in this legislation and push it, pieces of it, all of it forward, and keep building the momentum for future votes.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that this really could be a longer term campaign, at least a few more months, but maybe much longer than that, to try to get real impactful federal climate legislation that gets us to net zero climate pollution by 2050. I think I was interested to hear you talk about your history and the work we did together at the Human Rights Campaign on some legislation there. I had the opportunity to work on the federal hate crimes law, and then which was before you joined the Human Rights Campaign. But then we together worked on repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the law of the land for 17 years before repeal. And there were a lot of attempts to raise the issue in Congress and to get Congress to act on it before we were ultimately successful. I'm wondering if you have anything to say about that, the work that we did on Don't Ask, Don't Tell and marriage equality and other issues in the LGBTQ movement, and how and what lessons you take from that for the work that we're trying to do around the climate crisis.
Yeah, we talk about how these campaigns can last for years, and it can be frustrating for advocates and activists who want change immediately, and we all want change immediately. I want change immediately, but we have to be persistent, right? And we look at all the civil rights movements and all the wins that we've had that have taken years and are still in process. So, I think back to the Don't Ask, Don't Tell campaign. I was lucky. I came in the last year of that campaign before Obama signed the repeal in December of that year. So I was standing on the shoulders of all those who had come before me working on this issue. And when we we're on the ground in Florida and Arkansas and other states, trying to convince senators. It was a very targeted campaign, as this one on climate will be. We have to convince a certain number, a majority of our elected leaders to vote yes on what we want them to vote on, or no, depending. And when in Florida with Senator Bill Nelson, what we decided to do was to identify those veterans who had been discharged under this policy, those gay and lesbian veterans who had suffered that, and ask them to tell their story in public, to start to build public awareness around the issue, because the LGBT community is pretty small, and we needed our straight allies to also be speaking up around what they thought was fair and equal and right to do, which was to repeal this law. And so, we did a Voices of Honor tour around Florida, I remember, and we had a lot of media, and we had these veterans talking. And we also, and that generated a lot of support. I would go to different churches, I remember, church and faith communities, and have people sign postcards that we would package up and we'd send to Senator Nelson at a certain point and say, these 3,000 Floridians want you to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell because it's an unfair policy. That's some of the work that we did. We also took those veterans to talk directly to the senator and his staff, which was also very impactful. So these are the kinds of actions that we need to be taking now as well. But it took months. In that case, again, I came in towards the end of that campaign, but it was an effective way for us, and it was a winning way, frankly, for us to change that law.
Well, thanks. So I see that Hannah's written in and has asked about the most effective way for young people to really move the needle on important issues like climate change. And I want you to talk about that, but also to just more talk about what are the actions that people can take. I know this seems like such a big and weighty issue, and a lot of times I'm guessing people are sitting at home and feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of the climate crisis and the action that's required. So, what is it that people can do? And to Hannah's question, what is it that young people can do to really make a difference in this work?
Great. Yeah, that's such a good question. And, again, I just want to, shout out to all the young people out there that have moved this country and this nation, this world, frankly, since this is a global movement now, into a sense of urgency that we didn't have before, I think. And they're doing that by taking to the streets and being out in mass when we could be out in mass, and which has been very effective to show the breadth and the strength of the movement. There's also a lot of things we can do each and every day from our computer, from our homes, as we're sequestered, variously sequestered, to take action. We can, mention this before, we can contact our member of Congress. We can do that through picking up the telephone and calling. We can do it through our email, which we're used to doing on our action alerts or just individual emails. I would say, in that, and a point that this is what I learned when I worked for the Congresswoman in her district office, is that staff members have a lot of sway on what happens and what policies that member of Congress end up supporting or not supporting. And I feel that every single day, constituents who were calling the office, who were writing the office, who would meet me at events, who would set up meetings in the office, when the Congresswoman wasn't there, but I would take the meeting on her behalf. And I urge every single young person and old person and middle-aged person to do that, to reach out to their local congressional office and set up a meeting with them. Of course, it'll be a virtual meeting at this point, and have a conversation about why they think that member of Congress should take action on climate change, why they should support HR 2, or the provisions in it with their senator. And that's one way. Writing letters to the editor is another way. And this is, again, a simple thing you can do from your computer at home. And this reaches, this is your community you're speaking to when you're writing a letter to the editor. You are relaying something that many, many other people probably feel as well. And when they see a letter in there, first of all, you can bet your member of Congress and her or his staff are reading those letters to the editor. So that message is getting directly to them. But you're also bringing a community together. You're also saying, I'm for this. And other people are going to hear that. And they're going to learn something too. You can write, an op-ed as well. I also encourage you to attend a town hall meeting. A lot of members of Congress are holding virtual town halls now. A lot of them are on the COVID crisis and what they're doing to help with that. But getting a climate question into the queue to ask is a really important way of telling that member of Congress again, hey, I'm paying attention here, and this is what's important to me. And also, a lot of our organizers are out doing a lot of events, helping educate others around, what actions we can take and what are in these bills and what are in this climate crisis report. Because, I learned a lot when I was reading through the executive summary of the 600-page report. What these policies are and how to get involved in pushing them. And the last thing I'd say is just to make it personal. Telling your personal story is one of the most powerful ways of making change. Because when you talk person to person to someone and you talk about what you're feeling and how you're thinking, you're being an authentic constituent. You're not yelling, you're not accusing. You're saying this is what's important to me. And I just was remembering when we were working on the marriage equality campaigns, various ones in the states before we got that great Supreme Court decision, that there was a story of the son of a congressman, I think it was, or a state senator, who went home and talked to his dad. And the son was like, Dad, why aren't you supporting marriage equality? I've got gay friends at school and they're great. And, what's going on? And it was that conversation at home by that kid that changed his dad's mind. But, each of us has that power to change someone else's mind. And you don't have to be the kid of a member of Congress, but you can be, a person who cares about these issues, and talking about them is critical.
Well, can you talk a little more about that? Because I hear from a lot of people who think that their voice just doesn't matter, that maybe they live in a congressional district where their member of Congress is already supportive of climate action, or in other cases, they live in a congressional district where they believe that they're never going to convince their member of Congress to support strong federal climate action. What would you say to those folks about their voice and their opportunity to make change?
Yeah, I totally get that frustration. And, what I would say, I would again draw on my experience at HRC, where I was tasked with passing LGBTQ rights in the Deep South, which is not known to be necessarily the friendliest place to pass these rights. And so what we did in our work was to reach out to different kinds of potential supporters, even ones you may not think would be the right ones, but those who may be that your elected leader may be more willing to listen to. And so what we did is we built a faith-based campaigns, because we knew that our elected leaders, some of our elected leaders, or all of them, were strong people of faith. And so having some faith leaders come and talk to them about it. So maybe my voice wasn't, the radical lesbian activist wasn't the right voice to be having this conversation, or wasn't maybe the most effective voice. But if I could talk to the Baptist pastor and bring him on board with this issue, or he may have had a gay son or daughter, and set up a meeting with that Baptist pastor and that elected leader we were lobbying, that's the kind of conversation that can really change hearts and minds. And I think we can do that in the climate world, and we are doing it, and we must do that as well. So think about who your elected leader listens to. Is it the business community? And if it's the business community, go start talking to small business owners, or talk to their clients and say, let's get this business owner to, speak out about climate change. These kinds of strategies can really work. I've seen them work. They've worked in all the campaigns that I've been a part of. So that's what I would say in those tougher districts. You might have more to add on that, Jeremy.
Well, I think so, because I think that you just don't know how your story is going to impact people, and if, as you suggested, people can really plug into their own story, their own reasons for supporting climate action, being maybe fearful for the future, for themselves, or for their children or grandchildren, and share that story with your member of Congress. You just don't know where that's going to land. I've heard from so many elected officials about the reasons they chose to move from being a supporter to being a champion of an issue was because somebody came to them with a personal appeal, or the reason that they moved from being sort of on the fence about an issue to being a supporter is because of that personal story. And so I think that plugging into your own personal story and figuring out how to share that with your family, friends, neighbors, and yes, your elected officials is really a key part of the program here, is part of how we're going to move city councils, state legislatures, and ultimately Congress to act on climate, is by getting enough people really sharing their stories and moving all of those elected officials a little bit more towards being supportive, whether they're already supportive and we're moving them into being champions, or they're on the fence and we're moving them to being supportive. And I think that that's really a key part of this. And I think, just another little piece of this is really about everybody knows you've seen the State of the Union when the president is in the well of the House of Representatives with all the members of the House and the Senate and the Supreme Court and the cabinet officials all there, and up in the balcony are invited guests, and the president then throughout his or her speech, but his to date, her someday soon, hopefully, the president talks about something that needs to happen, and they point to somebody in the balcony and share their personal story. And I think about us sharing our stories with our members of Congress is we're giving them those stories that they can then use in their own personal evolution on the issue, but also as a way to talk to their colleagues in Congress about the issue, or to talk to their communities as they go back and do a town hall. These members of Congress, and other elected officials, city councilors, state legislators, governors, they can take inspiration and motivation from these stories that we are sharing with them. So I think that it's really so important that we each find our own way to talk about the climate crisis, about the need for urgent climate action, and to make that personal, and then to really share that with our family, friends, neighbors, folks who follow us on social media, and yes, with your elected officials. I think that that's just such an important part of how we're going to win.
Absolutely. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, just to add on to that, when I worked with Moms Clean Air Force, I mean, a million moms talking about why they want to protect the health of their children, and that why the elected leaders should take action on climate change and also on reducing pollution. It was extremely effective. So all those parents out there too, it's you've got your story right there in your house with you.
I love that. So Karin, we've talked about writing your members of Congress, letters to the editor, all of these types of actions that you can take, educating your family, friends, and neighbors, getting them on board, being a multiplier effect. Are there specific things that you would ask people to do today as they are thinking about what to do today, which, we're recording this on August 4th. Are there things that people should be doing today or as they listen to this when it's recorded?
Yeah, absolutely. Like taking action today and every day is important. And I would say, go visit edfaction.org to send a message to your member of Congress about how to rebuild better. We talked about that towards the start of this call. And we have an action there you can take right away. Write a letter to your editor in your local paper on this issue. Again, if you want to visit our edfaction.org website, you can find a lot of language that you may want to include in that letter if you wish, or your, other issues. And then keep an eye on the campaign trail. I mean, the most important thing that we can all do coming up on November 4th is to vote. And if you're a member of Congress, you're a local elected leader, whoever it is on the ballot, then if they're not voting and doing things you want them to do, it's time to put someone else new in that job. Or if you like what they're doing, give them your support. So you can also volunteer for good candidates. And we really, really urge you to do that as well. Gary, you might want to talk a little bit more about that.
One quick clarification, just so that we are not in any way suppressing the vote, that Election Day this year is November 3rd, Tuesday, November 3rd. So don't wait till the 4th. Make sure to vote on the 3rd or before if you can vote by early voting or vote by mail. So November 3rd this year.
Sorry about that.
Minor issues, but that one's a critical date, so we want everybody to remember Election Day, November 3rd. So we're going to wrap up here shortly, but if those of you out there watching, if you have any questions that you'd like to see us address before we do wrap up, please go ahead and put them in the Facebook chat or the Facebook comment line, and we will try to get to those. Karin, do you have other thoughts that you want to make sure we share about the campaigns, about climate action, about this moment of challenge and hope?
I think we covered a lot of territory here. I just wanted to say that I, read John Lewis's posthumous essay in the New York Times this week or last week. And he called on us, on our nation, to redeem the soul of our nation and to manifest the beloved community, which is a term he took from Martin Luther King, creating a better community. And I think our work on the climate crisis is part of creating that beloved community, where we have a safer, healthier, stronger country, where everyone is valued and safe. And that's where I see our moral imperative right now. That's where I see my moral imperative in doing this work on the urgent issue of the climate crisis.
Wow. I can't imagine a better way to close us out. So thank you, Karin. That was amazing. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today and, of course, to work with you every day on this critical issue. I want to thank all of you out there for joining us. Again, you can officially join EDF Action at no cost by taking action on our website or by texting EDF Action to 52886. You'll join our growing team of advocates around the country, and together we will advance strong federal climate legislation. If you appreciated this conversation, please share it on Facebook. And again, thank you and have a great day.
And vote on November 3rd.